3 years ago, I set a fire with my own hands and burned alive the husband who held me under bathwater and broke 3 of my ribs. The police confirmed the DNA match. The coroner signed the death certificate. I flushed his ashes down the drain myself. Today, he is sitting on the sofa in my new home. His face is completely unmarked by any burn. He is holding the cup of hot tea I just poured, and he is wearing that smile, that familiar, bone-chilling smile I have woken up screaming from 100 times. My fiancé slips an arm around my shoulder and calls him Big Brother. And out of the corner of my eye, I watch the man who promised to spend a lifetime healing me, handing his brother a carving knife with a smile. They say domestic violence is never just once. What they don't tell you is that the monsters who crawl back out of hell know the rule better than anyone. 3 years to the day after I burned my husband alive, he came back. He was sitting on my new sofa, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. The silver cufflinks at his wrists caught the afternoon light and threw tiny, sharp reflections across the ceiling. His posture was loose, almost lazy, the posture of a king reclaiming a throne he had never truly lost. He surveyed my apartment, this sprawling, sun-drenched penthouse I had bought with his death money, with something approaching amusement on his face. There was no trace of a burn anywhere on his skin. The man who had twisted and blackened in that fire 3 years ago, whose ashes I had personally flushed down a storm drain in the pouring rain, that man now sat before me, his skin smooth and whole, his mouth curved into that familiar, offhand cruelty I knew in my bones. He was even drinking the tea I had just made. 𝐃𝐄𝐒𝐒𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐓𝐈𝐎𝐍. The good kind. And he was chatting with my fiancé like they were old friends. Elena, Julian said, sliding a warm arm around my shoulder from behind. His voice was thick with a joy so genuine it made my stomach clench. This is the girl I've been telling you about. My fiancé. We're getting married next month. You've been telling me to settle down for years, remember? The man on the sofa lifted his head. His gaze moved over me like cold syrup, starting at my ankles and crawling upward inch by inch, past my knees, past my waist, pausing at the hollow of my throat. Then his eyes met mine, and he smiled. My stomach tied itself into a knot so tight I thought I might vomit right there on the Persian rug. The angle of his lips, the slight asymmetry of that smile, it pulled 1 millimeter higher on the left, just like it always had. My nervous system had catalogued every detail of that expression over 6 years of marriage. It knew what was coming before my conscious mind did. You know, he said, turning the teacup idly in his hand, his thumb stroking the rim, she looks exactly like my ex-wife. The one who died in that tragic fire. Every drop of blood in my body froze solid. My eyes had already dropped to his right hand, to the web of flesh between his thumb and forefinger. A scar sat there, a gnarled, pale rope of keloid tissue, shaped like a centipede curled in on itself to die. 3 years ago, on the worst night of my life, I had driven a pair of pruning shears straight through that hand. He had pinned me to the dining table by my throat. His other hand was working at his belt. His breath stank of cheap whiskey, and he kept saying it, over and over, like a prayer, * you belong to me. I gave you this life. I can do whatever I want with it, * my right hand was scrabbling blindly across the windowsill behind me, searching for something, anything, and then my fingers closed around cold metal. The shears I'd left there that afternoon after trimming the roses on the balcony. I drove the blades into the hand that was choking me. The tip went in through the web of his thumb and punched clean through the other side of his palm. Hot blood sprayed across my face. He screamed and let go. I ran down the hallway with blood running into my eyes, slammed the bedroom door, jammed my dresser and nightstand against it, and struck the match. And now he was sitting in my living room, holding a teacup with that same hand. Whole. Functional. Scarred, but alive. He hadn't just survived. He had changed his face. He had changed his name. He had become the long-lost older brother of the man I was supposed to marry next month. But the thing that terrified me most, in that moment, was not the fact that he had clawed his way back from the grave. It was my fiancé, the gentle, tender man who had spent 2 years promising to stitch together every broken piece of me, smiling as he placed a fruit knife into his brother's waiting hand. "Adrian, try the cherries. They're Elena's favorite." Julian's voice was warm and soft as a lullaby. The man who called himself Adrian took the knife. He did not look at the fruit. His eyes stayed fixed on me the way a hawk watches a rabbit frozen in the grass. He pushed the blade slowly through the belly of a cherry. Dark red juice ran down the steel and dripped onto the white cuff of his sleeve, blooming there like a warning. "Elena," he said, drawing out the vowels, rolling my name around in his mouth like he was tasting it. That drawn-out, savoring tone, it was the same voice he had used years ago, right before he shoved my head under the bathtub water. "That's a beautiful name. Who gave it to you?" My fingernails were digging into the skin of my thigh so hard I felt the wetness of blood through my trousers. Pain was useful. Pain focused the mind. I had learned that in 2 years of therapy with Julian, or rather, I had learned it despite Julian. Pain kept my breathing steady, kept my smile pasted on, kept me from running into the kitchen and pulling the biggest chef's knife out of the block and burying it in his neck right there in front of everyone. "Elena, you've gone quiet." Adrian tilted his head. The cherry was still impaled on the tip of his knife. "Not happy to meet your future brother-in-law?" His left eye had a tiny brown fleck in the iris, right at the edge of the pupil. In 6 years of marriage, I had been forced to stare into those eyes from inches away more times than I could count. When he was choking me. When he was whispering threats while the guests were still in the living room. When he was crying afterward, on his knees, swearing he would never do it again. That little brown spot was a fingerprint. Indisputable. Ineradicable. No two people in the world have identical iris nevi in the same location. This was not Adrian Cross. This was Damon Cross. My ex-husband, whom I had killed and whose ashes I had flushed away. "I need to slice some lemons." I stood up too fast. My knee cracked against the edge of the coffee table and pain shot up my leg. I didn't stop to rub it. I fled into the kitchen, my pulse hammering so loud in my ears I could barely hear my own footsteps. The open-plan design of this penthouse had been one of the selling points. The real estate agent had called it a social flow layout. The hostess could cook while still engaging with guests in the living room. I had imagined dinner parties, laughter, Julian's arm around my waist while I stirred a pot on the stove. Now that open plan was a sadistic joke, because from the kitchen I could see everything. Julian refilled his brother's teacup. They leaned toward each other, talking in low voices, completely at ease. They were not real brothers. Julian had grown up in foster care. He had told me that the first day we met, no parents, no siblings, bounced between group homes until he aged out of the system at 16. He had put himself through college and medical school on scholarships and loans. He said he had never had a family. That was the moment I first reached out and took his hand. Now he was calling this stranger brother and handing him knives. When had they started talking? What had passed between them? Did Julian know nothing, or? I braced both hands on the cold marble of the kitchen island. My knuckles were white. Cold sweat had soaked through the back of my silk blouse in less than a minute, and the wet fabric clung to my spine. Don't panic, Elena. You killed him once. You can kill him again. You are not the terrified woman who used to flinch at loud voices. You are the woman who locked the door. You have always been the woman who locked the door, *. Does slicing lemons usually take this long? His voice exploded right behind my ear. I spun around. He had come up to the other side of the kitchen island without making a sound. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened. He leaned forward, both palms flat on the marble, closing the distance between us. I could smell him, cheap cologne layered over cigarette smoke and something medicinal underneath. That cologne, I knew it. It was the same $30 knockoff he had drenched himself in 3 years ago, the kind that could never quite cover the sour, animal smell beneath. He was wearing it on purpose. He was signaling me in every possible way. I was just distracted. I forced a smile and grabbed the paring knife from the cutting board, positioning a lemon under the blade. You hold a knife very professionally, he said, watching my hands. He dropped his voice to a low murmur that only the two of us could hear. Grip at the base, blade angled down. Easy to flip it upward and drive it straight into someone's throat, isn't that right? My hand jerked. The blade bit into the tip of my left index finger, and a perfect sphere of blood welled up against the pale skin. He stared at that bead of blood, and his expression shifted into something I knew intimately. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even desire. It was pure, undiluted pleasure, the kind a child gets from burning ants with a magnifying glass. Not hatred. Just the love of watching something squirm. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was brutal, a hot iron manacle clamping down over the bone. His thumb found my pulse point with surgical precision and pressed down hard. The heartbeat there was racing at a gallop, a Morse code telegraphing exactly what he wanted to hear. Terror, terror, terror. 3 years, he breathed. 3 years, wife. You took my life and bought yourself a penthouse. Every word was a bomb going off in my chest. He wasn't even pretending anymore. He had walked through my front door less than 2 hours ago and he was already done playing. That was reckless. A real infiltrator would have spent weeks, months, slowly building trust. Unless he didn't need to bother. Unless he knew that even if I screamed for Julian right now, Julian wouldn't help me. Unless Julian had known from the start. That thought scared me more than his hand on my wrist. Let go of me, I hissed. Or I'll call Julian. Do it. He leaned close, his lips brushing the shell of my ear. His breath was hot and wet and it made my skin crawl. Go ahead. Call your gentle, loving fiancé. Guess who he sides with. Guess how close my dear little brother and I really are. His other hand came up and traced a fingernail lightly down the back of my hand, following the blue line of a vein. That gesture, I had felt it 100 times before. It was his ritual. He always did it right before the first hit, like a pianist flexing his fingers, like a butcher testing the edge of his blade. My brother didn't tell you. I'm not going back overseas. I'm staying right here, in this beautiful apartment you bought with my blood money. I'm going to watch the two of you play house. And then, on the day you finally think you're safe, I'm going to show you what real, absolute, bottomless despair feels like. The sliding door to the balcony opened. Julian walked in, phone in hand. His eyes went straight to our arms, to Adrian's hand locked around my wrist, to the blood welling from my fingertip, to the tremor I couldn't quite suppress. The air froze for half a second. Then Adrian let go. He didn't snatch his hand away like a guilty man. He released me slowly, almost tenderly, his thumb giving one last stroke across the tender skin of my inner wrist. He picked up the pitcher of lemon water I had abandoned and raised it toward Julian with an easy smile. "Elena makes excellent lemon water. Smells so fresh." His voice was warm and smooth as honey, as if the word wife had never left his mouth. Julian crossed the kitchen and slid an arm around my waist, pulling me behind him in a gesture that looked protective but felt like a cage. He ruffled my hair with his other hand, the way you might pat a nervous dog. "Adrian, be nice. She's shy. You'll scare her off, and then I'll be very unhappy with you." His palm was warm on my back, but the hand pressing into my spine was cold. Icy cold, like meat straight from the refrigerator. He half carried me back toward the living room. As we passed through the hallway, I looked back. Adrian was still standing at the kitchen island, silhouetted against the window. The fruit knife was in his hand, and he was stabbing it slowly, rhythmically, into the same cherry, over and over. When he saw me looking, he opened his mouth and shaped 3 silent words. *C. You. Tonight, *. That evening, he moved into the guest bedroom next to the master suite. Dinner was takeout. We sat around the long walnut dining table I had spent 2 months picking out, the 3 of us, pretending to be a family. Julian and Adrian talked about finance, about the state of the markets, about the years they had spent apart. I sat next to Julian and pushed food around my plate. I ate almost nothing. Every mouthful felt like swallowing broken glass. Adrian's eyes flicked to me every few seconds, landing on my hair, my throat, my collarbone. The glances were light, almost casual, but each one raised every hair on the back of my neck. Julian seemed to notice nothing. He served me food. He dabbed a spot of sauce from the corner of my mouth with his napkin. He talked about our honeymoon. He thought Greece would be nice, sun and sea, perfect for someone who was always cold. Adrian chimed in that Santorini was overrated and we should go to Crete instead. They planned my honeymoon together while I sat there, trapped in the headlights of their performance. At 2 in the morning, I lay rigid in the king-size bed, listening to Julian's slow, steady breathing. The penthouse had 11-foot ceilings with recessed lighting strips. Even in the dark, I could trace the faint outline of the fixtures above me. They looked like a noose stretched long. I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I did, I saw the fire. It had started with the curtains. I touched my lighter to the hem of the bedroom drapes, and the flame crept upward, slow at first, then faster and faster, a bloom of orange eating the fabric. Outside the door, Damon was throwing his body against the wood. The door was barricaded with my dresser and nightstand. He screamed my name. First threats, then curses, then, I have never admitted this to another living soul, then begging. I didn't open the door. I sat on the balcony railing, 12 stories up, the night wind at my back, watching the room fill with fire. The heat pressed against my face like a hot towel. Inside the bedroom, he was screaming. It didn't sound human. It sounded like something being skinned alive. I didn't move. Not until the screaming stopped. Not until the ceiling caved in. Not until I heard the sirens. Later, the police pulled a charred body from the wreckage. The medical examiner identified the remains through dental records and residual DNA. The dead man was Damon Cross, my husband, a man with multiple domestic violence reports on file, a man the neighbors had called the police about a dozen times. The case was ruled involuntary manslaughter. Given the long history of abuse, I was sentenced to 3 years, suspended to 4 years of probation. I took the $300,000 life insurance payout, shut down every social media account I had, sold everything I owned in that city, and boarded a bus with 2 suitcases and a body still mapped in fading bruises. That was how I ended up here. And that was how I met Julian. He was my therapist. I walked into his office for the first time and couldn't speak for the entire 50 minutes. I just curled up on his couch and sobbed. He didn't push. He sat quietly and handed me tissues. On my 3rd session, I managed to say Damon's name. After every session for months, I went straight to the restroom and threw up. A year in, he took my hand and said he couldn't be my doctor anymore. He was in love with me. Another year, and he was down on one knee with a ring on my birthday, promising to spend the rest of his life filling my world with light. I said yes because I believed someone finally wanted to catch me when I fell. Because when he said I can't change your past, but I will never leave your future, his eyes held nothing but steady warmth. Now I understood. That wasn't sincerity. That was the absolute focus of a predator watching the trap snap shut. I slid out of bed, bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. This penthouse was mine. I had paid for it in full. To accommodate Julian's work, I had converted the 2nd bedroom into his private study and home office, soundproof door, built-in bookshelves, the same comfortable leather couch from his old clinic. I moved through the dark like a ghost and opened his laptop. The password was my birthday. He hadn't changed it. Arrogance, or perhaps he simply believed I would never dare touch his things. I found the folder buried deep in his D drive, patient files. Dozens of folders arranged by initial. I clicked on the one labeled Elena Vance, PTSD intervention record. The document was over 200 pages long. The early entries were standard clinical notes, assessments, trigger identifications, sleep and medication logs. But around 2 months ago, the tone changed. The detached, professional voice vanished. What replaced it was a tone I had never seen before, a kind of thrilled, clinical hubris. The field journal of a collector describing his most prized specimen. June 14th. Subject's belief in ex-husband's death is absolute. Emotional dependency fully consolidated. Asset transfer substantially complete. She has voluntarily proposed a joint property arrangement post-marriage. Trust threshold at maximum, July 2nd. 5th video conference with K. Identity adaptation progressing well. Facial recovery exceeds projections. Subject's response to the concept of meeting partner's family is positive and anticipatory. 0 alert indicators, K. Who was K? Not king. Not killer. July 18th. Next phase confirmed. Introduce desensitization therapy. Physical intervention via stimulus source. Objective 1. Create a sealed environment from which outside help cannot be summoned. Objective 2. Through graduated fear stimuli, induce voluntary signing of property transfer. Objective 3. Final disposition TBD. Must coordinate execution level details with K**. I bit down on my lips so hard the taste of iron flooded my mouth. He hadn't been writing treatment notes. He had been writing an operations plan. He wasn't healing me. He was breaking me down into something compliant and docile, something that would hand over everything I owned before it was disposed of. And the stimulus source, *K*, was the man sleeping in the guest room next door. You know, reading your fiancé's laptop in the middle of the night is a terrible habit. The voice came from the doorway, low and rough as gravel. My heart stopped and then slammed into my ribs so hard I thought it might crack bone. I whipped around. Damon, Adrian, was leaning against the doorframe. He was shirtless, wearing only loose lounge pants, a glass of red wine in his hand. The city lights through the window painted his bare torso in shades of neon and shadow. My eyes locked onto his left side. From his ribs down to his waist, a massive patch of scarring twisted across his skin, dark, mottled red fading into purple-black, the edges blurred like melted wax. Failed skin grafts. The new tissue had never fully fused with the old. The result was a grotesque topographical map, the contour lines of hell itself. He hadn't escaped the fire unscathed. The body they pulled from the rubble had not been his. He had swapped himself for some poor stand-in, but he had paid a price. 3 ribs, 1 leg, and the entire surface of his back. He caught me staring. He glanced down at his own scars, and his mouth twisted into a smile. Recognize them. He took a step toward me, then another, bare feet whispering on the floorboards. That fire was so bright, he said, his voice almost dreamy. The curtains, the bedsheets, the wardrobe, the flames climbed the wallpaper. The whole room turned into an oven. I was outside the door, throwing myself against it, and you had it jammed shut from the inside. It didn't budge. Not an inch. His tone was calm. Too calm. The stem of the wineglass creaked under his tightening fingers. I smashed the bathroom window at the end of the hall. The glass cut my arms to ribbons. I squeezed through the frame, and the whole back of my body. He reached over his shoulder, miming a tearing motion, peeled right off. It stuck to the broken glass and just stayed there. I hit the ground from 3 stories up. 3 broken ribs, compound fracture of the left tibia. I was barefoot, wearing nothing but half-burned trousers, my back still bleeding. I heard the fire trucks coming and I didn't run toward them. I crawled into the ventilation shaft behind the building. 40 minutes, I crawled through a space barely 3 feet wide. He stopped in front of me, close enough to touch. Do you know what I thought about during those 40 minutes? He reached up and took my chin between his thumb and forefinger, forcing my head back. I thought about you, Elena. I thought, you actually did it. You actually fucking did it, His grip tightened, nails digging in. I spent a year on operating tables in Seoul. Skin grafts. Facial reconstruction. Bone reshaping. 13 surgeries under general anesthesia. Every time I woke up, I had tubes down my throat and my whole body wrapped in gauze like a mummy. I was in so much pain I couldn't even cry. And every single time, I told myself the same thing, don't die. If you die, she wins. Stay alive. Become someone else. Walk back into her living room and drink her tea and smile at her new man, and then take back every last thing she stole from you, He leaned in until his nose nearly touched mine. So tell me, wife. What do I do with a woman who tries to kill me twice? Behind my back, my right hand was wrapped around a box cutter I had pulled from the desk drawer when he started talking. My palm was slick with sweat. The metal was growing warm against my skin. But my voice came out steady. You're making one mistake. He tilted his head. 3 years ago, I was the one who locked the door. I lifted my chin and looked him straight in the eye for the first time. 3 years later, I can lock it again. Something flickered in his eyes. And then the overhead light blazed on. Adrian. Elena. What's going on? Julian stood in the doorway in his gray cotton pajamas, hair mussed from sleep. His expression was groggy, confused, the picture of a man woken in the middle of the night. But I caught it. In the instant the lights came on, before the confusion settled over his features, there was a flash of something else underneath. Cold. Calculating. Assessing the scene, our positions, our faces, the way Adrian's fingers were still clamped on my chin. Adrian's recovery was flawless. He let go of my face with a gentleness that looked almost real, even brushing his thumb over the red mark his grip had left behind. Nothing. Couldn't sleep, came looking for a nightcap. Ran into Elena doing the same thing. He raised his wine glass toward Julian. Your fiancé shouldn't walk around barefoot, by the way. The floor's freezing. Julian crossed the room and pulled me into his arms. His body was warm and solid, smelling of clean laundry and sleep. He wrapped one arm tight around my shoulders and ran his other hand from my forehead down to the nape of my neck, the exact gesture he had used 100 times to soothe me out of nightmares. Sweetheart, what are you doing in here? Bad dreams? He looked down at me with genuine, tender concern. Concern. Not panic. Not the anger of a schemer whose plan has been disrupted. Just pure, devoted worry. How much of this man was real and how much was performance? Or was he so skilled, so deep into his own manipulation, that he could summon any emotion on command? Couldn't sleep, I murmured, sliding the box cutter silently into the pocket of my pajama pants. I was looking for sleeping pills. Pills are bad for you. He pressed a kiss to my temple and looked over my head at Adrian. Get some rest. I'll show you around the city tomorrow. A lot has changed since you were last here. Adrian drained his wine glass and set it on the bookshelf. I'm looking forward to it. He said, looking forward to it with his eyes fixed on me. Back in the master bedroom, Julian tucked me into bed with exaggerated care, pulling the covers up to my chin. He lay on his side, propped on one elbow, watching me in the dark. The city glow outside traced the line of his jaw and the curve of his shoulder. He looked like the man I had fallen in love with. Elena, he said softly. You've been off all day. You barely ate at dinner, and then I find you in the study with my brother in the middle of the night. Are you afraid of him? It was a therapist's question. Open-ended. No judgment. Space for the patient to fill the silence. He was probing. Testing to see if I had figured it out. No, I said, closing my eyes. He just looks at me strangely. I'm probably being too sensitive. You know I don't trust unfamiliar men. He didn't respond right away. The silence stretched out so long I thought he might have fallen asleep. Then he gave a soft laugh. His hand came to rest on my cheek, his thumb tracing slow circles on my cheekbone. The touch was silk soft and sticky as a spider's web. You overthink everything. My brother spent too many years alone overseas. He's odd, his social skills are a little off. But he's not a bad person. He's been through a lot. We're all going to be family soon. You'll get used to him. Family. I felt the word hit my stomach like a stone. Julian had no family. He was a foster kid who had aged out of the system alone. He had told me once that he didn't have a single person in this city he could call to meet for a drink. And now he was bringing a faceless, rebuilt domestic abuser into my home, calling him brother, handing him knives, and telling me we're all family. Sleep, Julian murmured. His fingers slid from my cheek to my eyelids, gently pressing them closed. I'm here. You don't need to be afraid of anything. I'm here. I thought about the two men and the plan they had built. After crawling out of that ventilation shaft, Damon had spent a year on operating tables, 13 surgeries. Then he had tracked down Julian through the plastic surgery registry. He was wearing my brother's face and asked me to sign off on his psychological evaluation. By our third meeting, he showed me a list of patients and asked if I knew any of them. Your name was on the list. He showed me your photo, the one you took for your clinic intake form. White blouse, hair pulled back, dark circles under your eyes. You looked like a paper doll about to blow away, asterisk. They had been working together for a year. And in that year, Julian had made me breakfast, held me on the balcony in the sun, wrapped his body around mine on stormy nights and whispered it's all over now. He had memorized every food allergy I had, every flower I loved, the dates of my period and all my irrational fears. He had memorized every soft and tender thing about me so he could use them as weapons when the time came. I woke the next morning before either of them. At 5:30, in the thin gray light before dawn, I padded barefoot into the kitchen and started pulling out ingredients. Whole wheat bread, eggs, milk, lettuce, black pepper. And from the very back of the pantry, behind the cans of soup and bags of rice, a jar of peanut butter I had bought 6 months ago for baking and used maybe twice. Damon had a severe peanut allergy. Once, when we were still dating, he ate a bite of coleslaw that had been dressed with a trace of peanut oil. Within 3 minutes, his throat was closing. Hives erupted across his body. The paramedics hit him with 2 epinephrine shots just to keep him breathing. It was one of the only days in our entire marriage he didn't have the strength to hit me. I unscrewed the lid of the jar. The smell of roasted peanuts rose up, thick and rich. I took a butter knife and scooped up the tiniest amount, barely the size of a pea, and spread it in a whisper-thin layer between 2 slices of bread. Then I buried it under fried eggs, lettuce, tomato, and so much cracked black pepper that no other smell could possibly get through. I set that sandwich at Damon's place at the table. This was my final test. If he ate it and nothing happened, then he really wasn't Damon. Maybe there was some cosmic explanation, a long-lost twin, a bizarre coincidence, 2 men with identical iris nevi. In that case, I would apologize. If he ate it and his throat started closing, then this breakfast was my declaration of war. At 8 o'clock, both men emerged from their rooms. Julian wore a light blue Oxford with the sleeves rolled up, looking like he had walked off a magazine cover. Damon was in dark casual clothes, hair neatly combed, looking rested and comfortable. Something smells good. Damon dropped into his chair and surveyed the spread. His eyes landed on the loaded sandwich at his plate. Look at this. My little brother hit the jackpot. He picked up the sandwich without hesitation and took a large bite. He chewed. Once. Twice. His brow furrowed, just slightly. My heart stopped entirely in my chest. But he didn't spit it out. He swallowed. He even took a sip of milk afterward and gave me a flawless smile. Delicious. A little heavy on the pepper, maybe. Impossible. That was pure peanut butter. Even in a microscopic amount, a person with severe peanut allergy would feel something. The tongue would prickle. The throat would itch. His body would know. Unless he really wasn't Damon. In the 2 seconds my brain was spinning through this, Julian moved. He lunged forward and snatched the remaining half of the sandwich from Damon's hand. His voice was low, but I heard the tremor of genuine, barely suppressed panic underneath. Adrian, what the hell are you doing? Damon looked at his empty hand and shrugged. It was a tiny bit. I'm not going to die. You've got the pen. Julian turned to face me. The filter cracked. The warm, gentle mask of Dr. Julian Cross, devoted fiancé shattered right in front of my eyes, and underneath it was something I had never seen before: cold fury, clinical assessment, and a flash of genuine outrage. Not the outrage of a man protecting his brother. The outrage of a controller whose experiment had just gone off script. "Elena." His voice was barely above a whisper. "You put peanut butter in that sandwich." He knew. Not only did Julian know about Damon's peanut allergy, he had identified it in the first bite, before Damon himself had shown any visible reaction. He had been waiting for this. He knew I would test the man. He knew about the jar of peanut butter in the back of the pantry. He knew my mind, my patterns, my instinct to fight back. And he had let it happen. He had let Damon take that bite because he needed confirmation of his own, confirmation that I was still the woman who would try to kill her abuser with whatever she had at hand. He was running an experiment on both of us. He had put us in a cage together just to watch us tear each other apart. The air in the dining room froze solid. The three of us sat frozen around that walnut table, all the lies and masks of the past 3 years suspended in 2 seconds of perfect silence. And then I laughed. I looked Julian straight in the eye, and I smiled, a bright, terrible, radiant smile that held 3 years of swallowed rage. "You're right. I did. My ex-husband was allergic to peanuts too. I wanted to see if your brother was just as tragically disposable." Damon's face changed. It wasn't a flush of anger, it was a deep, physiological, uncontrollable reddening. His breathing shifted, a faint wheeze whistling at the back of his throat. His lips went from pink to dusky purple. He clawed at his own neck with both hands, nails leaving red furrows in the skin. His eyes bulged, the whites shot through with cobwebs of broken vessels. The peanut butter was working. Even a trace amount was enough to detonate the bomb wired into his immune system. He crashed backward in his chair and hit the floor with a sound like a side of beef dropping. His spine arched. His limbs spasmed. A thin, inhuman hissing leaked from his throat, and he writhed on the hardwood, tearing at his neck as if he could rip out his own trachea. "Pen," he choked, staring up at Julian. "The pen." Julian stopped pretending. He kicked his chair aside. It slammed into the wall and left a gouge in the paint. He dropped to his knees beside Damon and yanked an epinephrine auto-injector from the inside pocket of his blazer. He was carrying it on him. He had been ready for this all along. He ripped off the safety cap and slammed the injector into Damon's outer thigh. The spring fired, the drug punched in, and Julian dropped the spent pen on the floor like a piece of trash. He stood up, straightening his shirt, and looked down at the man writhing on his floor, the man who was supposed to be his brother. Then he turned to me. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled off his tie and folded it once before tossing it onto the table. He rolled up his shirt sleeves. His forearms were lean and corded with muscle. He walked toward me, and his eyes, those soft, gentle eyes that had gazed at me with such tenderness for 2 years, held nothing but cold calculation and a quiet, clinical cruelty. "Elena," he said. "No pet names now. Flat as a frozen lake. You're even more ruthless than I estimated." I backed up until my spine hit the edge of the kitchen island. He planted both hands on the marble on either side of me, caging me in with his body. "Since we've dropped the last pretense," he said, his voice soft and terrifyingly calm, "we can stop playing house." He reached up and hit the master control panel on the wall. Asterisk click. Click. Click, asterisk. Every electronic lock in the penthouse slammed home. Front door, balcony sliders, all the windows, even the ventilation panel above the stove. The automatic blackout shades rolled down, layer by layer, swallowing the morning sun until the whole space was sealed in a dim, airless twilight. My $1 million penthouse had become a hermetically sealed steel coffin. Damon finally dragged himself up off the floor. The epinephrine had reversed the anaphylaxis, leaving him shaking and pale, his neck a mess of scratches and welts. His voice was shredded. 3 years, he rasped, and you're still trying to kill me with food. He limped over to stand beside Julian, the two of them forming a wall between me and any possible exit. You can have the money, I said. I was surprised at how calm my voice sounded. The apartment, the accounts, take all of it. Just let me leave. I won't call the police. I won't tell anyone. I'll disappear. Let you leave. Damon's laugh was a wild, broken thing, bouncing off the sealed walls. Did you let me leave? When you locked that bedroom door, did you come back to let me out? I screamed your name until my throat bled, and you just sat out there on the balcony and watched. He tore his shirt open. Buttons scattered across the floor. The burn scars across his chest and ribs glistened under the dim lights, a continent of ruined flesh. I smashed the bathroom window. I jumped 3 stories. I crawled 40 minutes through a ventilation shaft with my skin peeling off in strips. A year of surgeries. 13 procedures to turn my face into someone else's. Do you want to know how the real Adrian Cross died? Heroin overdose in a motel in Bangkok. His face was rotting off. I saw the news and I knew that was my way in. I took his name and his face and I found his little brother, and we put this whole beautiful thing together. And when did that happen? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. When did the two of you start working together? A year ago, Julian answered. He spoke as if presenting a case study at a conference. Damon found me through the plastic surgery registry. He was wearing my brother's identity and needed a psychological evaluation to pass the immigration background check. We met 3 times before he gave me a list of names and asked if I recognized any of them. Your name was on the list. He showed me your photo. Julian smiled, remembering. He stared at it for 10 full seconds without moving. And then he started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It wasn't angry either. It was reverent. Like a pilgrim finally reaching the shrine. Damon cut in, his ruined voice dripping with satisfaction. Because I knew God hadn't forgotten about me. He delivered my ex-wife straight into my brother's clinic, so we could finish this together. So you planned everything, I said slowly. I looked at Julian, you approached me, courted me, proposed, set a wedding date. And then you told your brother overseas to fly back for the ceremony. Every step was scripted. You missed the best part. Damon licked his cracked lips. The wedding is real. But after the reception, you'll have a tragic accident. Too much champagne, leaning too far over the balcony railing. A 12-story fall. So sad. I'll handle your affairs as your brother-in-law. And Julian here, as your fiancé. Well, legally, he won't be entitled to a penny. Isn't that perfect? Julian's eyebrow twitched. A micro-expression, there and gone in a fraction of a second. But I saw it. And Julian, the trained psychologist who could read faces like a polygraph, had seen it too. Damon had said I'll handle your affairs. He hadn't said we. He hadn't mentioned splitting anything. And the man beside me, the man who had studied human behavior for 2 decades, had caught that omission before I did. I turned to Julian and dropped my voice so only he could hear. Do you actually trust him? Julian didn't answer, but his pupils dilated slightly. A man who changed his face and erased his entire identity. A man who killed 3 women in South Korea before he came back here. You think he's going to split $3 million with you once he has it? You think he's going to let you walk out of this apartment alive? I pressed every word into that tiny crack in their alliance. You're a psychologist, Julian. You know better than anyone. Antisocial personality disorder. 0 capacity for loyalty. You're not his partner. You're a tool he's using. And the moment he's done with me, you're next. Shut up. Damon's face darkened. Who bought this apartment? Who set up all your identity documents, your accounts, your whole new life? What happens when he decides you're a liability? Does he have leverage on you? Could he make you disappear the same way the real Adrian Cross disappeared? Shut your mouth. Damon's hand came around in a wide, vicious arc. His palm smashed into the side of my face with the full force of 3 years of festering hatred. My eardrum popped, and a high-pitched whine filled my left ear. The impact threw me sideways, and my forehead hit the metal edge of the kitchen island's corner. Skin split. Hot blood sheeted down into my eye, turning the world red. The pain cleared my head instantly. I had been waiting for this. From the moment I woke up at 5:30 to make that sandwich, I had been running through the endgame. I knew Damon. I knew that the second he lost control, he would hit me. And the second he hit me, he would lean in close to watch me suffer. He always did. He didn't disappoint. I staggered up, leaning against the cabinets, letting my body look broken and stunned. My right hand slipped into my pocket and closed around the box cutter. Damon, calm down. Julian grabbed Damon's arm. His voice was tight now, not protective, but annoyed. A strategist watching the plan go sideways. If her face is bruised, how do we explain that? There are 200 guests at the wedding. You want her walking down the aisle with her face swollen. Who cares? Damon shook him off. His eyes were locked on me, wild and bloodshot. We'll say she fell. She used to fall all the time, remember? Down the stairs. Into the coffee table. Onto the bathroom tiles. She's very clumsy. He stepped toward me. 3 years, Elena. Every time I woke up on that operating table, every time they peeled the bandages off my new face, I was thinking about you. I told myself, don't die. If you die, she gets away with it. Live. Become someone else. Walk into her house and drink her tea and call her wife right in front of her new man. And then, when she thinks there might still be a way out, choke the life out of her with your bare hands, His hand came up toward my throat. Now. I yanked the box cutter from my pocket. I had honed the blade on the bottom of a ceramic mug the night before while he slept in the next room. It was needle sharp. I drove it upward and into the palm of his reaching hand with every ounce of strength I had. The blade went through his palm like it was passing through wet paper. The tip burst out the back of his hand in a spray of fine red mist. Damon froze. For one full second, he just stared at the metal handle sticking out of his flesh. Then he screamed. It was a sound that started deep in his gut and tore its way out, raw and animal and full of shock and fury. I didn't give him time to recover. I let go of the knife, dropped my weight, and swept his ankle with my shin. He toppled forward, off balance. As he fell, I drove my knee into the outside of his left leg, the exact spot where his tibial plateau had shattered in that fall from the window 3 years ago. Even after all the surgeries, that joint had never fully healed. Crack. The sound was small but sharp, like a dry branch snapping. His leg bent sideways at an angle no leg should ever bend, and he crashed to the floor, his head bouncing off the leg of the dining table with a hollow thud. "You!" Julian lunged, not at me, and not to help Damon. He went for the control panel on the wall, fingers stabbing at the screen, trying to override the lockdown. But I had already pressed the emergency call button on my phone. 5 seconds of sustained pressure, a silent alarm with live GPS coordinates that I had programmed 2 hours before breakfast. Julian heard the distant sound of sirens and his face went white. He scrambled for the front door, trying to manually release the deadbolt, but I had physically jammed the electronic locks on every door and window. He spun back to the control panel and hammered at the screen. The screen flashed red, *incorrect password. 5 failed attempts. System locked for 30 minutes, *. You changed the master code. He whipped around to stare at me, and for the first time, real fear broke through his composure. When did you? I leaned against the cabinets, blood running from my forehead into the corner of my mouth. I smiled at him. 2 years, Julian. Did you really think I spent those 2 years doing nothing? I reached into the drawer and pulled out a second box cutter, the backup, and set it on the kitchen island, the blade pointed toward him. You studied me. I studied you back. You recorded every one of my breakdowns. I recorded every micro-expression you made when you lied, that little twitch of your right eyebrow. You learned what I was most afraid of. I learned what you wanted most, the perfect, controllable subject. A broken woman you pulled out of the abyss, who would spend the rest of her life grateful and obedient. That was never me. I installed this smart home system. I set the master password. The administrator access you've been using for the past year was a dummy account I gave you to make you feel in control. Every time you touched that panel, every time you thought you were running my house, you were just feeding me data. Your behavioral patterns. Your operational hours. Which button you'd reach for first in an emergency. I tapped my temple. It's all up here. The front door exploded inward. Heavy battering rams and the full weight of a tactical team hit the reinforced steel, and the frame splintered. Sunlight and armed officers flooded the apartment in a single crashing wave. Hands. Everyone, hands in the air. Damon was still screaming when they lifted him onto the gurney. His left knee was shattered, his right hand impaled, his face a mess of bruises from the fall. None of it added up to 1/10 of what he had done to me over 6 years. As they wheeled him past me, he grabbed the rail of the gurney with his one working hand and hauled himself upright, his bloodshot eyes burning into me like hot coals. You think this is over? His voice was a wet rasp. You think the police can protect you forever? When I get out? You're not getting out. I looked down at him, my voice perfectly flat. The identity you stole, the real Adrian Cross, was wanted in connection with 3 homicides in South Korea. You didn't know that, did you? You thought you were picking up a dead man's clean record. You picked up 3 murder warrants instead. Every day you spent living under his name, you were adding time to your sentence. His eyes went wide. The shock in them was real, and deeply satisfying. I didn't watch them take him away. A female officer draped a thermal blanket over my shoulders and guided me to the couch. I sat wrapped in that silver crinkle of foil and told them everything. The 6 years of abuse. The fire. Damon's reappearance as Adrian. The conspiracy with Julian. The files on the laptop. The peanut butter test. Every detail, in order, without breaking down. The detective taking my statement paused her pen several times to exchange glances with her partner. She asked. The fire 3 years ago. How did that start? I looked her in the eye. Her face was young, probably not yet 30, full of the effort of staying professional in the face of something monstrous. I thought he was dead, I said. My voice came out even in calm. He got the door open, or broke it down, I'm not sure. I was hiding in the bedroom. I thought he was coming to kill me. After the fire was out, they found a body in the wreckage. DNA said it was him. I didn't know he had escaped. I didn't know he had faked his death. The prosecutor standing beside her was writing everything down. Legally, this was a gift. Double jeopardy didn't apply in quite the same way across all jurisdictions, but the principle held: if Damon Cross had never died, then I had never killed anyone. The old involuntary manslaughter conviction would be vacated. And this time, the man on trial would be him. Identity fraud. Attempted murder. Unlawful imprisonment. Conspiracy to commit murder. And if South Korea got involved, 3 more homicides waiting across the sea. Julian was let out in handcuffs. As he passed the couch, he stopped. The officer escorting him tugged his arm, but he didn't move. He just stood there, looking down at me wrapped in that silver emergency blanket, blood drying on my face. He looked at me for a long time. "You won, Elena," he said finally. His mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. "But you should know, that night in the study, when you were trembling in my arms. I wasn't acting." I didn't answer. I watched him being led away. 3 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. The lead detective on the case drove me home, not to the penthouse, which was still a crime scene, but to a temporary residence they had arranged. "Damon Cross started talking in custody," she said, flipping through her notes. "He gave up 3 additional cases, trying to bargain down his own charges. While he was in South Korea, using Adrian's identity, he met 3 women. Same pattern every time: romantic or business approach, build trust, transfer assets, then stage an accident. 2 were ruled accidental deaths by Korean authorities. The 3rd one filed a stalking report before she died, but it was dropped for lack of evidence. He laundered the money and used it to come back here and find Julian. 3 women. 3 lives. They hadn't escaped. They had faced this same monster, in some city across the ocean, and they had fought and screamed and maybe, on some desperate night, found a spark of courage just like I had. But they hadn't made it out. I had. I was still here. I turned my face to the car window. The city I had lived in for 2 years but never truly called home slid past in a blur of early autumn leaves and pale sunlight. South Korean authorities have reopened those cases. They're sending a joint task force. Both Damon and Julian will face cross-border charges. She handed me a document with an official seal. "Also, regarding your prior conviction, the DA's office is fast-tracking the vacator motion. You should have a clean record within the month." I took the paper. It was thin, just a few pages. It weighed almost nothing in my hands, and yet it was heavier than everything I had carried for the past 3 years. "There's one more thing," the detective added. "Julian Cross is asking to see you. Says he has something to say." I went. The interview room was cold and fluorescent. Julian sat behind a steel grate and a pane of reinforced glass, wearing a blue prison jumpsuit. His hair had been shaved short, revealing a scar on his scalp I had never seen before. He looked 10 years older. His eyes were hollowed out, dark circles pooled underneath like bruises. I picked up the phone receiver on my side. He did the same. The silence stretched out between us, heavy and dense. "Do you know what I hate most about you?" he said at last. His voice was raw, scraped out. "It's not that you destroyed my career. It's not that you put me in here. It's that you never, not for one moment, truly trusted me. Not once. 2 years. I gave you 2 years of my life. I listened to your nightmares. I took your calls at 3 in the morning. I held you through every single moment you thought you couldn't survive. I thought, God, I was stupid. I thought I had left some mark on you. Something real. But you had an exit strategy from day one." He laughed. It was a terrible, broken sound. "When did you start suspecting me?" "From the beginning," I said. He went still. "The first time I walked into your office, you made a mistake. You said, I can't change your past, but I will never leave your future. That's not something any professional therapist says in an initial consult. That's something you say when you want a patient to form an attachment beyond the clinical. It worked. But it also tipped me off. I just didn't want to see it yet, because I needed something to hold on to. I kept coming back because I wanted it to be real. I wanted you to be real." He opened his mouth, then closed it. "Your approach was perfect, Julian. Nearly perfect. I switched the phone to my other ear. But you had one fatal flaw. You thought you were smarter than me. You thought a woman who had been broken by domestic violence would stay broken forever, waiting to be rescued. You underestimated the man I burned alive. And you underestimated me." He was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, a small, quiet acknowledgement of something he had known but never been willing to say aloud. "You really were my most remarkable patient, Elena." He set the receiver down. Stood up. Turned to go. Then he paused and looked back through the glass. His lips moved, shaping a final sentence that no sound carried. I read it anyway. "You were always stronger than me." I hung up the phone. The hallway outside the interview room was flooded with afternoon sunlight. It was a clean, golden autumn light, and it fell through the windows at the end of the corridor in wide, warm slabs. Somewhere outside, someone was burning leaves, and the faint, sweet smell drifted through the vents. I stood in that patch of sun and took the first full breath I had taken in 3 years. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the real estate agent, *Elena, the penthouse listing is live. 3 viewings already, all within your target range. Also, the listings in those cities you asked about, Charleston, Portland, Taos, are in your inbox when you're ready, *. I typed back, *thank you. Once this sale closes, no need to stay in touch, *. Then I popped the SIM card out of my phone, snapped it in half, and dropped the pieces into a trash can by the window. I wouldn't be using the name Elena Vance anymore. 3 years ago, I walked out of that fire thinking I had already been reborn. But rebirth isn't just changing your name and moving to a new city and pretending the past never happened. Real rebirth is when you send the monsters back to hell with your own 2 hands, and then turn around and walk into the sunlight without looking back. I pushed open the station doors and stepped into the bright, leaf-scented afternoon. The street was full of people who didn't know me, who didn't know that the woman with the bandage on her forehead had just ended 2 nightmares in a single week. I bought a hot chai from a cafe on the corner, wrapped my hands around the paper cup, and walked toward the train station. The crowd swallowed me up. A woman, unremarkable, anonymous, carried forward by the current of strangers, and this time, she did not look back.